So, you always won on the Hong Kong University student movement and events. Tell us.
The Hong Kong student movement, the big banner.
The umbrella movement.
The umbrella movement. It was basically a student movement that was against the Chinese government, who had not been committed enough to give Hong Kong a political reform in the election of the legislators and also the chief executive of Hong Kong. So from September to December, for 3 months, students from very senior high school classes and universities, they did not go to class. They basically stayed in downtown, the Central. So that's why it's called Occupy Central, or the Yellow Umbrella Movement. That became really a sharp demarcation between the Hong Kong and the Chinese government's trust on how they can actually remedy the situation. To the extent that recently it was even worse. You know about the big banner of Hong Kong independence. These banners were hanged in many campuses, university campuses in Hong Kong. 3 of our university vice chancellors or presidents have taken either an early retirement or resigned from the vice chancellor's position, the president's position. So what are the issues? To us, in a way, Hong Kong needs China. There's no question about it. Just the natural survival of Hong Kong. But the thing is, China is not so experienced in managing, a prodigal son, I like to call it, like Hong Kong. It's different from Tibet. It's different from Xinjiang, where these are the home-based entity under the nation. But Hong Kong is still under the nation through to the apprehension of the Chinese government. But then it's very different. Hong Kong has always derived our supremacy from being international. Our universities are more international, our universities are more modern, although China is catching up.
So, Satoshi, what does Japan think about these big China plans?
Well, of course, there's always a time lag made by the any policies coming from the government takes a lot of time. But it takes a long time because the Japanese government, tends to be very careful about everything and overly careful, and also intimidated by the giant economy, which is China. We're I think the government is trying to be a follower right now instead of being a leader right now. So we're sort of, of course, we like to play a primary role in the global economy and so on. But right now, we don't have the resources to fight against China or the US. So.
ASEAN?
Yeah.
How's that going? Could you comment?
Asia?
ASEAN.
ASEAN.
Okay.
ASEAN, sorry, yeah.
Well, of course, economy is doing Singapore is doing very well in economy, and Hong Kong too, and Taiwan. The reason that the number of international students from Korea declined is probably they caught up. I mean, they are at the left, pretty much the same level of the Japanese industry. So they probably realize that they have nothing to learn from Japan anymore. So yeah, there are things going on around there. The dynamics because of the economic growth and who's leading and who's following.
Yeah, I think that's a good summary. Questions?
you know, looking at the One Belt, One Road policy, what is the exact strategy in terms of universities and their role in that One Belt? I asked you this before a little bit, but, you know, is it the concept that they're going to create linkages or greater linkages, they already have some, in these various institutions and other institutions in other parts of this global effort? And will there be money involved in it, or is it more kind of just in relationships? Or what's the role of universities in this strategy?
Chinese universities?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Well, it's also part of what Chinese universities are, developing. There is also in China an Association for International Education, and they were very quick in developing a paper, I think in 2015. And that said, concentrated mostly on the countries in the region, adjacent countries, which are often still developing countries with a significantly younger population than China has. So China is primarily reaching out to those countries to help them to develop their higher education systems. And that Association for International Education in China said, well, that also means that our students will have to learn to understand people in the region better. They have all studied abroad in the West, probably speak English very well, but maybe we should now look at the languages in countries like Vietnam and Cambodia, etc. We need to immerse in the curriculum more, knowledge, etc., etc. As to ensure that over time, the countries would also be able to generate young labor, also, to contribute to Chinese productivity. And for me, that paper read a little bit like the early papers of the European Commission, early 90s. It was economic development, regional policy. But of course, there is another element to it when it concerns China, and that's very paradoxical, very difficult to understand, I think. That's why we do this project. That on the one hand, China wants to open. Really, the word open was, all across the last speeches. Open up to the world, open, open, open. But we have the strong impression that within China, universities are not becoming more open. So how will these two things go together? And how much choice will universities have within China and operating outside China in making their choices in this respect? How autonomous will they be within and across borders? The impression is, and that's why I showed the data on engineering and science and technology, the impression is that academic freedom is not felt as a problem in those fields, whereas it is in fields like the humanities, very much, and social sciences. So what does that mean for the Chinese universities to operate as world-class universities? Carol said it very well, world-class university without academic freedom. But also, I think a question is, world-class universities that are very strong in a very narrow aspect, technological and very specific fields of engineering, and humanities and social sciences probably living in almost a different world. How then can they contribute, as was said earlier, contribute to a wise way of developing technology and a creative way, and to interdisciplinary work? So all these things, I think, are big questions. I'm not sure if I answered your question with all these questions, but it has a big role. It's a formal element also of the strategy. Yeah,
it's interesting that one would have thought about, like we all aim at going to the United States for high form knowledge, technology advancement, but in the One Belt, One Road initiative, so far, there has been more that China pour in resources to bring these people in, the young students in. Just in 2014, there were 170,000 students from the One Belt, One Road region, which comprises of 66 countries altogether, going into the Chinese universities. But there was only 50,000 Chinese students who would go to these One Belt One Road regions or countries. So I just have always had this thinking that China is probably more confident in working out a legitimate scheme of educating the others than sending their own students to the other countries, which is typically also in Hong Kong. When they have to manage things off the home basis, it gets a bit out of control for China at times. But I think they're improving. The soft diplomacy power, that sort of thing, they are actually improving.
Hi, thank you. My name is Stephanie Kim, and I'm from UC Berkeley. I work at the Institute of East Asian Studies. And I guess I just wanted to make two observations and then hear the panelists' comments to that. So there are two major points that I'm getting from hearing your very interesting talks. And the first point is that mobility patterns are becoming increasingly complex in ways that we haven't seen so far. So for example, you have Hong Kong students going to the mainland students coming to Japan and to Hong Kong. You have China centering itself as a kind of destination for international students, primarily from other Asian countries, not just as a main sender of students. So my observation of that is that there's a clear sense of a kind of inter or intra-Asian pattern emerging here, but at the same time, you have these internationalization mechanisms of the English language medium, a so-called Western-driven narrative of world class and rankings that then seems to create a tension with the actual phenomenon of internationalization that seems much more centered within and on Asia. So I'm wondering if the panelists could comment on perhaps the tensions and contradictions of these two different things.
Student flows are generally primarily within regions, the largest ones. So that's no exception. The exception was Asia going to the West, but other flows have always been more significant within regions. So that would be an adjustment in a way to the standard in that sense. And your other point, maybe the second point, help me. It's late in the afternoon. Your other point, help me a little bit. It was about the flows and
international mechanisms that are so-called Western-centric.
Well, world-class universities, I'm sorry, but it was invented in Shanghai. Cynically or ironically, but the model they put up to the world as a world-class university was the Western university. That's right. But it was, I think, framed and ranked through ranking mechanisms, confirmed as the global model. And consecutively, the Chinese universities themselves are now trying to work towards that model. But I think they do it in a very narrow way by developing a very narrow part of the university up to the world-class level. And actually, and that's also been said very explicitly in policy documents, social science and humanities will be with Chinese characteristics and Chinese philosophy. Well, you know what that means. I mean, there's a lot of compulsory learning of, as you said, well, you can speak about that better than I.
I've never seen anywhere else that the Asians are so hung up by the rankings. To the extent I would even say they're very superstitious to world rankings. Part of it is really just what I call unintended consequences out of, in the past decade or two, these Asian universities have become very competitive in terms of adopting a Western model of review and assessments. very severely, we are also now working around a very radical tenure system, publish or perish. Lots of assessments on university teaching programs, not necessarily on the side of freedom of speech or whatever, but as an unintended consequences. I think that's why we enter those international rankings. I think Japan is also working around the rankings.
Right, yeah, right.
Very hung up by that.
Okay, well, when we talk about mobility, student mobility across borders, what you can see in Japan is, the number of international students is steadily increasing in Japan. But we see a lot of our domestic students who are not interested in go outside.
Yeah.
So maybe your institution's experiencing that. In the 90s, 80s or 90s, there are a lot of Japanese students walking on your campus, but everywhere I go, all the admissions directors say we don't receive very many applications from Japan now. So it seems like they're not either our students are not interested in what's happening outside, or just simply they're so inward looking, and I'm afraid they're not really. We're dropping out of the internationalization race. So yeah, that's a major trend, though. Yeah.
But replacing by the Koreans. The Koreans are really everywhere.
Two quick questions, perhaps, if John allows. I don't know. Well, we ask them together, and we will wrap up. Sorry, but
I'd like to answer from Osaka University. So I'd like to add a comment about the nationalism from the standpoint of the Japanese. So actually, thank you. I'm thinking that what is nationalism for Japanese people? So I'm still wondering. So this is because we lost the concept at after the defeated in the 1940s, and so it's very difficult to explain. But after that, so I think that so from the Japanese people, so their effort is to have the position, stable position in their context. So especially in the global context. So in terms of the economy, so the Japanese industry have the good position in the world in the 1990s. So maybe we have the success, so to have the position. But when we consider about the academy, so it's still skeptical. But so impartially, we got a good position because we have very many Nobel Prize winners. So, but now, so we have our economy is now worse, and now we struggle to have the stable position in the global context. So this is the condition of the Japanese. How can I say? It's a nationalism at the universities, and if we think about the Chinese situation, so they try to have the top of the global academic activities, and it is just a quantitative manner. So now, so they are trying to have the quality, so in their activities. So I'd like to know the further situation, so especially in China and other Asian countries. Thank you.
one. That's the last question.
He's asked lots of questions.
A quick one.
What do we make about this declaration of the president in the Congress saying the university should study his thought and stuff like that? I'd like your comment. Is this for you? I just think that universities will ignore.
They do. You mean to study? Yes, that's right. Yes. Yeah. And Yeah, I mean, if you want to have an example of nationalism, whether it's new or old, there is compulsory courses in every Chinese university that are totally focused on that, and the new ideas of the current president, more so than some of its predecessors, go straight into that. Yes, and it is well known that a lot of students call that the sleeping courses, and and that it's for certain teachers, for many teachers, it's very difficult to teach them because the students are not always that engaged. But it is, it's as you say. Yeah, I think we can close. Thank you.